All right, good morning, everyone. On behalf of Cal Nonprofits and our colleagues and allies across the state, we're really happy to have everyone here that is interested in this early phase of the 2026 governor's race here in California. We are going to spend some time today with some fabulous state leaders in various fields talking about what it is that we might hope for, expect, work for, and what strategies may be most useful for us as we approach the 2026 governor's race as a nonprofit sector, what it would take for the next governor to be an ally and a champion, how we set that up, what we offer, how we engage, and that's really what we're here to talk about today. So we're delighted to have all of you with us. We are recording this, of course, and we'll be sharing it out at a later point. But I want to frame up today's conversation a bit about what we do here at Cal Nonprofits. Many of you know us, that's why you're here. But for those that may not, briefly, we are a policy voice for California's nonprofit sector. We do our work through three primary areas. One is advocacy and policy work, second is education, and the third is research. And all of this is really to build a more powerful and politically engaged nonprofit sector, a network across the state. We believe that nonprofits, being a massive part of our state's social and civic infrastructure, but also economy, really need to take our seat at every table. And what we're trying to do is build the relationships with our policymakers, our elected officials, and ensure that the knowledge that we all have on the ground in all the communities where we work is part of any discussion about policy anywhere in the state of California. So we're going to talk a little bit more today about where we're headed. And what we want to do is engage, and if you're wondering why we're doing this in December of 2025, when it feels so very early, and we're thinking about next year's gubernatorial race, this year, what we want to make sure we do is spend the time up front discussing with our colleagues, amongst ourselves, with leaders across the state, what it would mean for us to have a champion in the governor's seat come 2027. We all know that there are many parts to our state's leadership and governance, and we're going to talk about some of those today, but obviously a key one is our executive office. So what do we want from a governor? What do we need to do to prepare the field of candidates to be that person, whoever may sit in that seat in 2027? What kind of strategies are we already employing or not, and how do we build the strength and the muscle to do that? We're going to talk about this at a very high level today, and we'll get into some of the specific issues as well as we go along. The idea here is to start the conversation with a group of leaders across the state in various fields, which is what we're going to do. I want to remind us, before I bring them on, that the road ahead for us is to start here and really forefront the issues and the strategies that we need to engage in as a field, as a sector. We are then going to build out a platform and really try to articulate what it would mean for the next governor to be a strong advocate and a champion for the sector, to understand it well. What does that mean from a structural position? What does that mean from a political policy role? And then we're also going to be engaging with the candidate field as it develops. Some of you know that we are very early in this process. The field is still taking shape. Every few days or weeks, there's a new announcement about who's in, who's out, who's considering it. So we know that we are going to have a large field, and it's never too early to start engaging there. One of the things that we want to remind everyone, and some of us on this discussion this morning are veterans in policy work, and you know how nonprofit 501c3 public charities can and should engage. Others may not, or may be a little more timid about that. But I want to be very clear. 501c3 nonprofits are always welcome at any policy table, whether we're talking about budgets, public policy. That is absolutely our role. The firewall, the thing we cannot do, will not do, should not do, is engage in the partisan side of it, the candidate side of it. So you will never hear us or any upstanding nonprofit endorse a candidate for office or otherwise get involved in partisan politics. But you absolutely will, and what we want to see is more, in fact, engagement on the policy side. So questioning candidates about their policies on particular areas of work, critiquing policies that candidates bring to the table, talking about what we want to see signed into law, not signed into law. That is all very much on the table. what we have to do at a time like this, and I want to give a shout out and really point people to what we believe is one of the best resources for this, and that's the Alliance for Justice. They run the Boulder Advocacy Program. We've partnered with them for decades. That's not an exaggeration, and we do periodic trainings. So look for more of those if you want to learn more about where the lines are and how to engage. But we do want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about today is at a high level, at a policy level, at a budget level, what is it that we need from a governor to be a champion? So when we get to the parts where we're going to be doing one-on-ones, and we do intend to do this in the new year with the candidates, we're going to put that out open to all candidates. It's important anytime a nonprofit is weighing in on a candidate field to be equal opportunity in their invitations. It doesn't mean everyone has to take the invitation, but we do want to reach broadly and just engage on those same issues across the board. And you're going to see us do that, and we're going to talk about making sure that everyone has the tools to understand where those rules lie. So, with no further ado, we are delighted to have a group of true leaders in various fields across the state of California, and I'm going to bring them on screen one at a time here, ask everyone to take just a couple of minutes to speak about where they sit relative to the governor's seat and the role that they see themselves playing as we go into this next year. And then we're going to jump into some of the more specific details. So first, I want to bring on screen Senator Monique Limon, who is, as many of you know, just been sworn in as the new Senate Pro Tem of the California State Senate. She is representing the 21st District. Welcome, Senator Limon.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks everyone for being here.
We are delighted that we're going into this year with you as our champion. We know you have a long track record of supporting the nonprofit sector. And I will just give this away. I'll let Senator Limon say more, but Senator Limon was the founding chair of the Select Committee on the Nonprofit Sector in both the Assembly and the Senate. So we have a long working relationship there. So we're going to talk all about what comes next. Next up, I want to introduce Khadija Alam, who Let's get that panel slide back up there, if you would, Robert. I want everyone to see who we've got here as we bring folks on. Thank you. So Khadija is the Executive Director of the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs. She is an advisor to the governor's office and has a deep and wide track record of engaging in all range of policies. So welcome, Khadija. Next up, I want to welcome Julie Baker to the screen. Julie is the CEO of California for the Arts, a statewide advocacy network of arts advocates working to show the value of the arts and introduce those conversations into public policy work. And also, I will say, happens to be a board member here at Cal Nonprofits. So welcome, Julie.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And finally, last but certainly not least, Marissa Lagos, who is a correspondent with KQED, a veteran political reporter, someone that you have doubtless heard from, especially if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, but in this day of internet, you may have heard from her anywhere on the planet. And she is covering the race and many of the candidates she has, of course, spoken to one-on-one, most recently part of a debate. And she has said to me, and so I say, for the first time in a long time, she doesn't have to moderate this conversation. So welcome, Marissa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I do want to give everyone just a few minutes to talk about their particular role relative to the governor's office and of course, any comment on this upcoming race. I would like to start with you, Senator Limon, just to give folks, and not everyone here probably knows how this all fits together. So this is a great time to start to share. So, Senator Limon.
So the governor's race is a very important race for the legislature. And I just, full disclosure, I have not weighed in, have not endorsed anyone. I think for me, as a leader of the Senate, it's really important that I go in to this role with the ability to work with whoever the voters elect to be the next governor. And a lot of the ways that it works between the leader of the Senate, the leader of the Assembly, and the governor is that we call them the big three. They tend to be the individuals that represent their, for us, for the speaker and myself, represent our respective houses and go into some of these broader negotiations on big issues that impact California. And so I think it's a very, very critical role and one that I will be working very closely with. And so I care a lot. And I care a lot about, the next governor, sharing, of course, values that I think that are important for all of us in California, but also having a vision, direction, being able to deal with the budget We have a very difficult budget that this new governor will be inheriting. They will not be inheriting what the last couple governors have inherited, which is, a budget that's more reflective of better times. And so I think that that's something that, I'm looking to. One of the dreams that I think we have in the legislature is that we will be continued to expand and advance our partnership with the governor and the governor's office. There are, three branches of government, as you all know: executive, legislative, and judicial. And so, the judicial really has their own role, but the executive and legislative branches, I think, are really important, and ones that, when we are strong, aligned, and together, you see the ability for us to get more work done in a different manner. And so I think that that's something that's exciting to me, and certainly want to build off the relationship that we've had with our sitting governor, Governor Newsom. I also think that it's important to note that while there's, this excitement and a lot of talk about the next governor, our governor still has a year left. And so this will be a very important year to think about the budget, about policy priorities, also just about the relationship between the federal government and the state. And so our sitting governor, Governor Newsom, will have a very big role to play in terms of what the next 12 months look like. I think, we've seen what these 12 months have looked like, in 2025. And I think in 2026, they will be equally important for us.
Great. Thank you, Senator. And a great point to hand off here to Khadijah, because we are 12 months to go with the Newsom administration. The final budget for the current governor will come out very shortly. January is not that far away. So there's a lot of framing to do. So Khadijah, could you speak a bit about what your role you play with respect to the governor's office?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here today amongst such esteemed panelists. And congratulations, Senator Lamont, on your historic pro-tempship. My name is Khadija. I'm the Executive Director of the California Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander American Affairs. We're the only ethnic commission established at the state level. We are charged with elevating the political, economic, and social issues of the Asian and Pacific Islander communities across the state. Right now, currently, California is home to over 7 million API communities. The commission advises the governor and the legislature on the views, needs, and concerns of the state's diverse and complex API communities. As you may all know, API communities, we have over 40 different ethnic groups. We speak over 100 languages. So we're not a monolith, and our needs are very different. Additionally, we, as a commission, are mandated to advise. We work with different departments and agencies on how to develop appropriate responses and programs that meet the needs of the API communities, including focus on cultural language sensitivity, hate incidents, and hate parent prevention measures. California has made historic investments in battling hate incidents and API and within API communities. So we, in partnership with Department of Social Services, are also charged with overseeing Stop the Hate grants at the state of California, and work very closely with nonprofits, especially API nonprofits across the state. Our work is very, closely. We work very closely with nonprofit sector. We believe they are the boots and the ears on the ground for the state of California, whether it's investments, whether really understanding the needs of our community and bringing them back to the legislature and the governor. And regardless of who the governor is, we'll be working very closely with, the next governor, and we'll continue to do so with the current governor in the administration.
Great. Thank you, Khadijah. And for highlighting some of the, California is often seen as a leader in so many fields and areas where we step forward first. So I really appreciate that sort of advocacy. And of course, the other kinds of advocacy we all do. So on that front, Advocate Julie Baker, Californians for the Arts, talking about one of the areas that, of course, often gets short shrift when it comes to budget time in schools, around the state. So, having an advocate for the centrality of the arts is always critical. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how you see this upcoming race and really the relationship with the executive office in general.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jeff. And what a delight to be amongst four women panelists. I just want to also point out that California has never had a female governor. So, not that I'm endorsing any candidate, but just a note. I think it's fascinating in the history of the state. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of California for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. We have both a nonprofit, and we are pleased to not only be a member of Cal Nonprofits, but also I sit on the board. And we also have a C4 lobbying organization. So between the two organizations, how we work with the governor and the administration is really trying to influence the agenda, as it were, and to help support the arts and culture and creative industries to be seen as essential to California's economy, to California's livability, and to recognize how diversity is our strength. And I think that one of the things that, we focus on is the arts worker and what are the arts workers' needs in order to thrive in the state of California. 1 in 10 jobs in California are in the creative industries. Arts and culture alone and the nonprofit sector, of which there's 16,000 in the state of California, represent over 800,000 jobs and 7.5% of the state's GDP. However, as you mentioned, Jeff, we're not really winning in terms of investments for that sector. While we're thrilled to have seen the Hollywood, film and TV tax credit happen this last year, not everything happens in Hollywood. Arts and culture are essential to every community in California. We need them in both of our schools, in our rural communities. They are the lifeblood of how we can actually build our local economies. Downtown revitalization, our empty storefronts. Artists and creativity are going to be essential to the way that California survives. Creativity is essential as we look at AI, as we look at climate change, as we look at some of the issues that are really affecting California. And affordability is going to affect every aspect, but particularly it affects artists and creative workers who have substantially been underinvested in the state of California. So we do hope as advocates that we can work with the next governor of California, as we have worked with the Newsom administration and the legislature, to ensure that creativity thrives in the state.
Thank you, Julie. And certainly, last but not least, we have with us one of the veteran political reporters who probably has more firsthand engagement with some of these candidates than most, and would love to hear from you, Marissa, about how you see this moment and the role that you play in the media and in the upcoming gubernatorial race.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And again, I would like to echo, it's lovely to be on a all-female panel. I think it's a weird time. We've not had an open governor's race essentially in 20 years, if you think about it. I mean, Jerry Brown was a bit of a coronation, as was Gavin Newsom. So I think as a voter, this is like really exciting. Even if you haven't kind of picked a candidate yet, you have a field of really within political circles, high profile folks. They're still working to introduce themselves around the state. And I think that this is like a good thing for democracy to have a robust competitive race in this moment. So I think it's great you guys are talking about sitting down with all of them individually. I think that, it's really hard in some of these forums. I had 6 candidates on stage on Friday. We only got to 4 policy areas. Everybody got like a minute or 2 in each area. That is not the kind of detail I know that you guys probably want to get to. And I think that, on a lot of these issues, or for a lot of these candidates, issues including how they'll handle the budget and nonprofits specifically are really undefined, because some of the top candidates either have never, been state lawmakers or worked in Sacramento, or haven't been in those positions for a while. I'm thinking about 2 of the front runners, if you believe the more recent polls, Katie Porter, Eric Swalwell, both members of Congress, have some legislative record there, but, let's be clear. Once you get to DC, a lot of Democrats are voting similarly, right? So I think the questions of really like their priorities and kind of their philosophy and how they're going to approach this are things I'm going to be really trying to push them on in the coming months. I would expect this field to narrow as June approaches. I think it's entirely likely that we will see one of the Republicans be able to make it into the top two, if, the party kind of coalesces around them. That kind of means that the ball game could be over in June. And so I think that like engaging early, having these conversations, having these forums now, is a really, really good idea. Um, as somebody who's covered the last three or four governors and does know all these folks, I think it's really difficult to assess in a lot of these, and to get a straight answer from candidates about how they'll actually handle things because, things look very different once you're sitting behind that desk and you have this $100 billion budget to kind of deal with. But if you look at what are the biggest drivers of our costs here in California? It's Medi-Cal and K-12 education. I mean, those just dwarf everything else. And so I think that those are, within those areas and obviously other policy areas, it's going to be really worth pushing these folks. And I'll be hopefully having all of them on our show. And, I already did that forum last week. I know there are many ahead, some of which will be involved in here at KQED. But I would really encourage folks to go out and try to, have those conversations themselves, or at least be in the audience for them.
Right. Thank you, Maris. Well, I hope for folks listening, watching here, that there's no secret any longer about why we've invited you all here. So we have our Senate Pro Tem, we have the head of one of the few, or the only ethnic cultural commissions in the state of California. We have the head of a statewide advocacy network, and we have a veteran reporter on this race. So this is the crew to talk about this issue, and we have some more time here this morning. So let's get into some of the issues. And I do have a few specific questions to each of your roles that I do want to tee up, and then we'll open the second half really to a conversation on the bigger themes. So I'm going to go back to you, Senator Limon, and ask, and I'll just frame up the fact that you've been a leader for the sector in the legislature, going on almost a decade now, and so you know well what we're working with and where the levers are and where the pressure points are. I would love to hear you comment on sort of what it is that the nonprofit sector has done well, maybe needs to do with respect to the relationship between the legislature and the governor's office, both the current governor and any future administration, and where you see it going. And in this new seat that you're going to hold, it's one of the most powerful in the state. What should we be doing? How should we be engaging to position the sector as a position of strength with respect to the governor's seat?
Thank you, Jeff. So I will say that, I've seen quite the evolvement from Cal nonprofits and the nonprofit sector. I mean, we went from not having, even select committees to having select committees in both housing and in both houses, and that took time. I also think that we went from kind of approaching issues from bigger level to then having a package. All of this has been part of the, how things have evolved. And just as a clarification, the package is very focused, intent legislation that's working in coordination. That's what a legislative package is. And so I think that it's an example of how we have built, I think, advocacy over the last 9 years. And so certainly where I hope it goes is that I hope that continues. I hope that you see two select committees that are active. I hope that you see two select committees that also work in partnership. I hope that we will continue to work on what a package looks like, not so much as far as like, hey, it has to be 6 bills, but like just having some focused, priorities each year. And that may mean other bills that are equally important that are going through, a separate process, or have different authors. I think all of that will be important. And as far as I think, that as far as creating a punch that is stronger, from the advocacy lens, I would say it's, all hands on deck approach, meaning every legislator counts. The more you have legislators involved and engaged, the more they're advocating, I think the stronger the message it is. And so I feel like it's great that our, gubernatorial candidates are aware, but like there's going to need to be work done in all the spaces for any of them to catch up on what the legislature has been doing. And we're going to need to make sure that we don't put all of our energy into just the executive branch, but also that we continue to foster the important relationships that are needed in the legislature. The more people you have saying the same thing and wanting the same things, whatever the legislative fixes are, I think the stronger the advocacy is. And just because you had a really good meeting with a legislator one year doesn't mean that 2 years later they're going to remember what your priority is for this year. And then in-house, meaning as nonprofits and as a sector, is really focusing on what those asks are. It never helps when you have, 1,000 nonprofits all saying 1,000 different things to each of the members that they meet with about what their priorities are. And that makes it very, very difficult, easy to do for obvious reasons, that everybody wants to make sure that the legislators and the lawmakers generally know who they are and what they do, but also you have to stick to the message of what the priorities are for the sector.
Thank you, Senator. Much work to do, no doubt. We'll get into some of those specifics. But Khadijah, I want to ask you, as you outlined, you're advising our state elected officials on a wide range of issues having to do with API communities, as you said yourself, 7 million people strong, 100 languages, incredible diversity in California. And a lot of that work, and obviously what we're here to talk about, is done with and through the partnerships through nonprofits. And in many cases, smaller, culturally specific nonprofits that are really of buy-in for the communities that they arise out of. So when we talk about that link between government and the nonprofit sector, what are some of the obvious challenges you see, and do you have recommendations about how government could partner better? Obviously funding is a big piece of it, but there's a lot more than just writing a check. So could you speak to that and how you see it evolving?
Yeah, so I'll also speak to the fact that I came from the nonprofit sector. I was an advocate, led statewide initiatives for 14 years. In the nonprofit sector. Now I'm in public service, so I got to see both sides of the equation. Coming from the experience from our commission and what we have seen work with the administration, you can't take away the fact that this administration and the legislature has made historic investments. I think what we have heard from our nonprofit sectors is yes, there were one-time funding, especially Stop the Hate funding and transformative grants, and what many of other state departments who were able to give to nonprofits. And I also think of an example of the Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications Office that now serves within the governor's office. There were a lot of historic one-time investments made to nonprofits, and they created, nonprofits were really able to build up because of those investments. Yes, they were one-time, and now those fundings are going away. Now nonprofits are really thinking about how they're going to maintain those services, how are they going to maintain staffing, how are they going to maintain funding. Those are an issue. So big part of, I would always say, budget is always an important one. And, as Senator Lamone has said, policy, coming around one ask is important, but budget part of the equation is also very important, and what we have seen worked. Yes, we're going to go through very difficult budget times, but if the nonprofit sector comes together around one ask, its budget and investments, I think that would go a long way. Of course, we're not going to get it all, one time we ask. This is a continuation. You have to keep on beating the drum, right, for it to echo. So I would continue always having this in mind, that we have to have a budget ask in place that incorporates a nonprofit sector, that comes from the nonprofit sector as a priority, along with policy and bills that you're going to come up with. One of the things that we have, we believe cultural specific nonprofits are so important to this work, because they provide language accessible information, that we're trusted partners. And this is the work, when in my past iteration, we worked on the census along with the fearless Jennifer Fearing and so many other partners, was, it was so important for us to invest in nonprofits and cultural specific nonprofits because they did the job that the state or other organizations could not do. For us, when we talk about language accessibility, data disaggregation, it's really important for us to invest in those. And the barriers we see is some of these nonprofits, capacity building is an issue, right? In order to provide services. So we want to make sure, that gets taken care of through investments. A lot of our organizations don't know even how to apply for grants or where to go for grants or what are accessible. So it's really important to also build an infrastructure and messaging. So, organizations that are culturally competent also are part of the bigger picture. When it comes to nonprofits, and would love to see that through. I know you all do a really good job of that, but would love to see the continuation of that in ensuring that our culturally specific nonprofits are part of the bigger picture as well.
Excellent. Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for reminding us that you have a nonprofit background. It's fair to say, feel free. Everyone on this screen has a nonprofit background. I really want to highlight that fact that we are everywhere. We like to say at Cal Nonprofits that nonprofits do the work that the for-profit private sector won't, and the government often can't. And so we work with both in partnership, and we bridge a lot of those divides and fill those gaps. So given that, I want to move to you, Julie. You mentioned the importance of the economic engine that the arts in particular, but nonprofits in general, really are in California. That is a message that we all try to convey. I think we're constantly. It feels like an uphill battle. Nonprofits are often seen as really lovely people, nice people solving big problems, and that's all true. But we're also a major economic engine, and we believe could be a stronger political force. So, what levers do we have as you do your work, or as you see what's happening today? What do we do to constantly remind and build that unified message that nonprofits are a driver, they're an economic strength for the state, but they are also a political force?
Well, I think as Senator Limon said so well, number one, we have to focus on our ask. We have to collaborate, right? We have to work together. Khadijah, I'm going to follow up with you because what you talked about, culturally specific messengers within communities, is really critical to how we work in terms of the influence we're trying to make with arts and culture and a delivery of solutions in every community. So I think that there's that prioritization and focus that needs to happen. I think that what we come up against often is that advocacy is sort of seen as, oh, I have to do that too on top of my job. And I think that when we really want to have a civically engaged, representative government, advocacy is an essential tool that every nonprofit needs in its tool belt. And I think that often it is something that is overlooked. And when we look at the corporate interests then they have government relations officers. They invest a lot of money in representation in advocacy. And so I think that this is something that we need to strengthen as part of how we work as a nonprofit industry. I think the misnomer of what is nonprofit, it doesn't mean any responsible nonprofit is not trying to lose money. They are building economies in their local community. They are providing essential services. They are providing jobs. We are the small businesses of California. So, separating ourselves, being so siloed, where we're not in collaboration with other interests that represent issues around affordability for housing, good paying jobs, wages, all of the issues, the climate crisis that is going to affect every person in California in terms of how we live and work. These are issues that affect everyone. And so I think that how we work together and how we show up in advocacy is essential. And it's not one time. I think that's the other thing that happens too, is that we sort of say, well, we have a lobby day, we have an advocacy day. I did my piece, or I voted and I did my piece, or we got the bill passed and I did my piece, or I got the budget, item that I wanted and I did my piece. There's so much more work to be done, because accountability advocacy to make sure that actually what you asked for is happening in a way that you hope it is also part of the game. So I hope that nonprofits really prioritize coming together in working towards who we want to see in the administration as well as the legislature and in positions of leadership. And we are grateful to have folks like Senator Lamone and Assemblymember and Speaker Rivas representing districts that are not necessarily just the urban cores, too. And representing rural California is really, really essential as well, particularly to the services that nonprofits provide.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for hitting on the point that it's not one thing and it never stops. So that's what we're trying to build here. So Marissa, I want to turn finally to you and talk about as this race shapes up, and obviously you're speaking with and facilitating in some cases these conversations or debates. Short answer as they may be. You mentioned yourself that the budget is dominated by education and health in California. It's a massive budget, obviously now the, I believe, fourth largest economy on the planet, if it were its own country, as we like to say, the independent nation state of California. But within that, a lot of those functions, the actual execution is done in partnership and sometimes through nonprofits. Where the state reach ends and then they reach further with a nonprofit partner, or they have a particular area that needs to be addressed, and sometimes a nonprofit that's in the community with street credibility and what have you may be the right entity to carry that out. In this moment, as you watch this candidate field evolving, we of course always hear the overlying headline of affordability and cost being driving so much of our politics right now. How do we square those two? What is the intersection, and maybe what's the role that nonprofits play in that, and how do we get that message through to our candidates? How do they see us as central solvers of those problems, especially in this very cost constrained environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that naturally a lot of the work you all do is aimed at helping people sort of meet their needs. Another way of saying bring down their personal cost, right? Or giving them tools to improve their situation so that they can, be bigger earners and those sorts of things. So I definitely think kind of focusing on that would be smart in this moment, given what we're, hearing from voters, hearing from these candidates. I think that also means that you need to be able to come to them and sort of show what that means, how it's working, that it's working. I think data points are often very helpful in policy debates in terms of like, what are you getting back for every dollar you spend? And then, I think too, like, you guys are already obviously doing this to some extent, but having somebody like Senator Lamone here is huge. Also getting to know, whoever she appoints and Speaker Rivas to the key policy committees, the staff on those committees, I think are often the ones who are actually shaping a lot of the policy and doing a lot of that data crunching. So I know you have folks like Jennifer Fearing who know the building better than I do, but I think the just sort of understanding that like a lot of these conversations are not one-time meetings. They are ongoing, years-long conversations. The biggest legislation I've seen pass since I started covering the state capitol, like 2008, 2009, were often multi-year sort of pushes, right? So if you think about a lot of the criminal justice reforms, Mark Leno started a lot of that work in the early 2000s. It didn't get finished until, in some cases, after he left the legislature. If you think about the housing policy, we've seen folks like Buffy Wicks and Senator Scott Wiener push. They got laughed out of a lot of these committees in their first year when they were talking about some of these things. So I think taking the long view is really important in these conversations, and understanding that often it takes multiple years to kind of bring everyone along. You might have a few people in the building who understand if you're trying to, make a big change, why that is in the first year, but it might not be that you can actually get a majority for quite some time. This governor Newsom has not, I think, every executive is different. And I think he and Brown took a similar approach of like not engaging in most sort of policy areas, most legislative debates, unless it was something that they were pushing. That could be very different in this next administration. I don't know. We don't know yet. So I think kind of taking a key there, a cue there from what the new governor is going to like sort of their leadership style is obviously going to be important. But there's 120 members of the legislature. They all get to introduce bills. They all do. And it's, I think, just as important to kind of build that like almost grassroots support for something as it is to, you could have the governor on board, but it doesn't matter if you can't get it through the legislature, right? So like, I think thinking about that in the ways that, again, what you do touches people's lives. This is not sort of an abstract idea. And I think that that's something that every elected official has to care about. And so, that also means that if you're going to a specific member and trying to convince them of something, it's really helpful if you're coming in with data and anecdotes and information about how this affects their constituents. Those are the people that hired them for this job. Those are the people that allow them to keep it or lose it. And I think, having that kind of, you're going to have to do both, right? You have to be able to talk statewide to someone like the governor or other, elected officials who are representing the whole state. And then you need to think about it on a more kind of like micro level for lawmakers often. And so, I think, I think persistence is often key, and being willing, to go in and understand that you're probably not going to get everything, and like, what's the definition of compromise? Is like nobody is that happy with it often. So I think coming in your mind, understanding like, okay, these are the like non-negotiables for us, and these are the things that maybe are more of a wish list, particularly given again the budget kind of situation and the constraints we're seeing really coming down the pike for, if you believe the LAO, many years ahead.
Thank you, Marissa, and thank you for the push there for reminding us all that it's long haul thinking. And I appreciate that Senator Limon noted that, look at the last decade and how far we've come in many ways of having some of our values and our issues more central in state government. And that's all good news, and it's never ending. So I want to move now and we're going to just throw this open, a couple of big picture questions. I was just reading this morning before we got on here, the San Francisco Chronicle's run a couple of days now of articles around the nonprofit relationship with city and county government, for example, in San Francisco. This is something they've often focused on, but these last two articles were about the sheer volume of dollars, so doubling approximately over the last decade. And then actually less than a decade. And then this morning they published a tool of showing like, here's where these public dollars are going into what programs, what nonprofit partners. And all of this in an economic environment where budget deficits are the headline, where cost of living is the headline. Nonprofits get put into this almost competitive role. Like, why are we spending dollars that way? And that's often very hard for nonprofits to get out of. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how do we position the nonprofit sector, not as a zero-sum game competitor for dollars so much, but as a key partner to do and solve some of this critical work and solve some of these problems that have to do with cost. I think that's something that almost every nonprofit runs up against at some point. Is we get pitted against each other. Why should I spend money on this versus that? And in this moment where everyone's watching the dollars and where are they going and why aren't they helping me? What can we do? What should we do differently? And that's for anybody that wants to talk about any piece of that.
I'm happy to start off. I feel like, one of the things that I would say is, we've talked about the situation of the budget. And so I think starting new programs, or asking for things that are above and beyond our means is probably going to be really difficult. Nothing is ever impossible, but it's just really difficult to do in this time. So it's really looking at, within this time, what are our ability to ask just for existing funds, right? Reuse of funds, flexibility in funds. I would say that those are probably the three areas where we may be more successful in 2026. And I think that, part of it is too, here's where we've made a difference. In some cases, we've allotted certain amount of money for certain things that nonprofits do. And I will tell you that it is through your feedback. I was just in a meeting on Friday with a number of members of the Latino caucus. And in this meeting, there were a conversation about the funds that we put out related to, just funds that were allocated in the budget. for a very specific purpose. And a lot of the feedback I heard made me feel very confident that these legislators had talked to nonprofits. So there were comments that came up about the fact that some of the nonprofits in rural areas, as has been mentioned, were not receiving them. Some of the ones that were smaller were not receiving them. That they had restrictions or guidelines, I guess the word is more appropriate, that were very catered for, certain, urban center ones as opposed to more geographically diverse or dispersed. And so I think those moments, you don't all see them, but I was like, oh, these folks have been talking to nonprofits. And so this is shaping the way that I think the legislature, at least that particular caucus, is going to go back to make the ask for future years of saying, hey, we have to make sure that the smaller ones are getting it too, that it's distributed across the state. Like all of those things were really coming up. And I think that that's an example of what you should be doing in a time to receive those budget asks. Like you don't just say, hey, this is the way that the program works and leave it as is. You want to give feedback to your legislators to make sure that we better adjust the program where we can.
Great, appreciate that. Other thoughts on how we navigate those pressures?
I'll just add that I think that, while we are in a system that has to think about return on investment, and I think nonprofits have incredible data to share around that. And I think that we have to do it for all of our funders. We have to show our impact, right? And so I think that number one, it's making sure that you're actually sharing that with your legislator, as you've mentioned, that they do deeply care about their own district. Show what impact you're making on that district, both economically. Again, I think that's really important because we have to say from a budget standpoint how much we're going to put into this particular program. But in addition, what is the return on innovation? What's the return on imagination? What's the return on livability? What's the return on social cohesion? What's the return on health and outcomes that may not be as obvious in terms of the dollar bottom line, but looking at it from a number of different bottom lines. So I think and right now, legislators are in district. This is the time to be talking to them as they're shaping their legislative priorities for the next year, in addition to reaching out to the administration in that way as well. So I think that, in the arts, for example, we have a lot of data that shows how much we can help with mental health, with the public health crisis, with the isolation crisis, and how we could be involved in those systems if we were actually incorporated into, let's say, social determinants of health, prescribing the arts. This is a different way of looking at a problem that we have in society and a potential solution. And I think most of us in the nonprofit sector have examples of that. So I think it's important for us to be lifting those up.
Appreciate that. Other thoughts? Khadijah?
Yeah, I think just going back to your question and just the basics of it, I think it should be understood that nonprofits are heart of the community. I'll give an example. Our commission does listening sessions with particular communities across the state, and we will not be able to do that, from finding space to bringing individuals and community members in a place, in a gathering over 50, 100 individuals. We would not be able to do that without the nonprofit sector. We just did one in LA with the South Asian Network. We were able to bring in community that usually does not have any connection to Sacramento. We were able to do that because of our nonprofit, partner on the ground. So again, nonprofit sector are boot in, they're really entrenched in the community the way, either city governments or state governments can't. So they're essential part of it. And, thinking about just why we're here together today is about, the election, next election, right? Gubernatorial election. Many of our candidates, if you don't know something, you don't know, right? Many of our candidates come from business backgrounds, different backgrounds, may not have had access to the information that nonprofit sector do. Going back to Julie's point, we are small business. Nonprofits are small business. We play a big part. We play a big part in the economy, local and state. We, individuals are, working. So, having all of that in place as a discussion item and ensuring that our candidates are educated around the role of the nonprofits play in their community is absolutely essential. So educating our gubernatorial candidates, not just asking them, what are you going to do for nonprofits, but actually handing them the playbook of this is what we need is absolutely essential because they don't know what they don't know. So it's really our responsibility to educate and give them a playbook. And this is what we need in your first, 100 days of your administration. This is how we can support you as a holistic nonprofit sector. So it's really important to educate candidates.
Excellent. I really appreciate all of this thinking, and I think that in addition to the economics piece, what you just said, Khadija, and certainly Julie as well, the notion of positioning ourselves as ally and really a resource for them to execute their mission and their particular agenda. So how do we do that? Julie, did you want to add something there?
I just wanted to add quickly that, nonprofits are so skilled at, particularly in a time, as Senator Lamone said, the budget is tough. There isn't a sector that knows better how to utilize a dollar than the nonprofit sector. We are used to having to work in limited resources. And I'm not saying it should be that way. I'm just saying that this is a time when we really can utilize that dollar more effectively than most sectors.
Right. And that's where, and of course, we get caught in that race to the bottom problem because we brag about how efficient we can be. And sometimes that borders on, and therefore it's okay not to pay us. And so this is, of course, one of the key fights that we have, and we've been educating the legislature on. And I do want to also flag that this year we did put out a guide to the legislature. This was not the governor's office. This was just the 120 members of the Assembly and Senate, which was really profiling briefly their connection to the nonprofit sector. And I think digging into that is also a critical tool. Like, what are the places we connect? But you've all also mentioned another dynamic. We have another 10 minutes maybe here together this morning at least. And one is the fact that California is often spoken of as a blue state, and I'll put that in finger quotes. And by the numbers, sure, of course. But in fact, it's a massive geography, incredibly diverse set of communities. They do not look all alike. Much of the state is rural. And so those messages are different. So obviously, when you're speaking to a local elected, that's contained with the district boundaries, give you some sense of what you're talking about and how to frame it. What about a state candidate? How do we effectively, as a cohesive nonprofit sector, talk about our work and what we do in such a diverse state? How do we bring a gubernatorial candidate along and really clarify what that looks like on the ground from place to place? Because that's complex.
I can, what I would suggest is perhaps there's so many gubernatorial forums happening across the state. I would encourage, the nonprofit community to perhaps do an educational gubernatorial forum. It's not just an opportunity to hear from them, but it's also an opportunity to educate them about the importance of the sector. Just during the API Heritage Month, our commission did an educational gubernatorial, education. We didn't have the candidates, but it was designed for them because we wanted to educate them about the API community. For example, I can speak to the Asian and Pacific Islander community. We have over 4.5 million eligible voters in the state of California. About half of them are probably registered to vote. And what we have heard in terms of data is probably about over half do not hear from either party. So it's not about the voters are not there. It's about engagement and how we engage and hear our communities. And, just learning from the recent election, New York's election, and how Mayor-elect Mamdani really leveraged the nonprofit sector to create his base and engaged voters that have never been engaged before is something that our sector should really think about and learn how to educate our, gubernatorial candidates moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Marissa?
Yeah, not to repeat myself, but I kind of feel like in some ways what you guys do in these conversations is similar to the way that I have to think about writing a story. And so, you know, and a lot of times, like when I'm telling a story, like a budget story, it is, using a particular anecdote, like one nonprofit, one, I'll give you guys a very specific example. In the spring, I profiled, as Trump was trying to cut a lot of programs, I profiled a domestic violence shelter that serves largely Asian and Arab women. And I was able to talk to a woman who had been a victim of domestic violence, and really use her story to sort of illustrate the larger work that these types of organizations do. So, not to be a broken record, but I think it goes back to kind of what I said at the top, which is like I think a combination of data and anecdotes are really important. I think if you're only coming in with numbers, you can kind of get lost in the weeds. And I think so much of what you guys do does tug on people's heartstrings for good reasons. And so using that, and I think in, some cases, maybe even bringing along with you to these conversations a person who has been a beneficiary of the types of programs that you guys are providing that's assisted by state funding, it's really powerful, right? But that can't be the only thing, right? It can't just be the anecdote. You have to back it up with a sort of information to make the case. And so I think kind of thinking about these conversations as storytelling is really powerful, and something that I think you guys have a natural kind of leg up on, because so much of the work you do is like has that emotional gravity to it. It's serving people, kids, families, women, men who are parts of these communities, and who are going to really kind of illustrate, the depth and breadth of what you do.
Absolutely.
I'll just add, I would venture to guess, and Jeff, I know you know the statistics on this, how many people are employed by nonprofits in the state of California. And in addition, how many people interact with nonprofits in their community? It's probably every Californian, let's be honest, right? So, number one, essential. But I think that the way that we can influence or try to ensure that whomever is in the next seat of power in terms of the governor of California is that we are showing up, now, as you're doing today. So thank you for this, that we're writing our own platforms. And we're showing them those platforms, and we are suggesting what should be included in those platforms. And then we're essentially, hopefully, being recognized as part of transition teams and whomever becomes governor, and that we have seats on those transition teams. And so that we are seeding, SEEDING, our power before it goes in. I think that we have an incredibly important role, and I can't imagine any person who isn't touched by a nonprofit. So I think it's an exciting time. I think we're, as Senator Limon said, the nonprofit sector, due to the leadership of organizations like Cal Nonprofits and Senator Limon in the legislature, have really started to recognize their role in not just providing the services, but providing an agenda and a direction for the state. So I think that's where we can be next.
All right, as we approach an hour, see, now I'm just getting started. Now we can go for another few hours if we wanted to. But we are time limited here. I really appreciate everyone taking the time. But I want to close, and let's take that slide down. I want to close on one last big question. And that is, you've all highlighted some strategy. It's long haul thinking, it's engagement, it's constant communication, it's clarity, it's storytelling, it's data. Is there a plank or two planks or three planks? If you were to try to craft in real time, and I know you've all thought about this, what are some key things that we should be lifting up to the gubernatorial candidates at this point? What would you see as being core platform planks for the nonprofit sector writ large as we exit today? And obviously, we're going to take the next few weeks and months to build this out. But I'm curious if something is obvious to you today. What flag should we be carrying on that front?
For us, again, nonprofits are essential to the work of state government, and I would hone in that point. And the sector has a capacity that should be sustainable for what we're going to need, whether it's, when we're dealt with fires, emergencies, COVID. It was a perfect example. Nonprofits played a huge role. When we went through, difficult times as a state and this nation, census work. So we have a capacity, we have institutions that are already developed, how to sustain them to ensure that we're ready for when something, as important as census comes up, or, we're dealt with, emergencies across the state.
Great. Thank you. Big issue, obviously, disaster relief. I know, Senator Limon, you probably have something to jump to. Any final thoughts for us on our platform? And
Yeah, so look, I think, as you think about your platform, I think it should be driven by really what your needs are, matched with kind of where the state is at, whether it's resources or also priorities, right? You've heard the state talk a lot about affordability. What does that necessarily mean? You've also heard the state talk a lot about just kind of, the fear and how communities are feeling. Like, what does that mean? I would not encourage folks to shift their mission. Again, for me, as you think about like going into next year and also just what your platform looks like, it should be realistic. It should be, I think, reasonable. It should be aligned with where the legislature is without being fancy or gimmicky or changing things. I think you should be real about what the needs are of the nonprofit sector, and more importantly, from a sector perspective, the people in California that you represent, right? Those that maybe don't have access to the Capitol, whose voices we aren't hearing, whose situations we're not learning about. That's, I think, what would be really, really important for the platform more than any specific item. It's the process of shaping that platform. I think that would be critical.
great. Thank you so much.
I love that answer. I think that is so critical in terms of representation. I think we're an enormous state with regions and region specific needs, culturally specific needs. But I do think that the idea of a cabinet level position with an expertise around nonprofits is something that I think would love to see in the future of California. For us specifically, we'd also love to see a Secretary of Culture. I think what is unique about California is people and places. And if we can protect both the diversity of all of the cultures, the 200 plus languages that are spoken in California, and the natural resources that we have, then we have a future for this state. But I'm deeply concerned about how we do that, and so I hope that both the administration and of course leaders like Senator Limon, I know are already recognizing how essential it is that we invest in and support the infrastructure for the people who are doing the work.
Great. Thank you. Marissa, we're going to give you the last word.
Keep up the good work. Yeah, I mean, I think, just staying engaged and finding the folks, that you can kind of connect with and build relationships with is really important. I think that, and that doesn't always have to be like the principal, right? That could be a staff member, especially when you get into the governor's office and, the pro tem and speakers. I think so much of the work is delegated to staff, understandably. And so I think like finding those people that can be your champions, like within the system is really important and crucial, and just like checking in with them. I think also like making it a two-way street, right? Obviously you guys are coming hat in hand wanting funding, but I think also talking to some of these folks, whether it's the governor candidates or legislative candidates and elected officials, about like, what do they want to see from the nonprofits in their communities? What do they want to see just in terms of, they probably have, you guys have specific windows, I think, into parts of life, and they probably have a broader view. So I think, working with people in a more collaborative manner can be really helpful and hopefully get y'all to where you want to be.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank all of you, Julie Baker, Khadija Alam, Marissa Lagos, Senate Pro Tem Monique Limon. Thank you for lending your time and your deep expertise and knowledge of where we're all headed. This is just the first of many conversations to come as we continue to engage with the candidate field for the 2026 governor's race. I want to thank everybody, the hundreds of you who joined us this morning from across the state and beyond. And we will continue this conversation all with an eye toward a real succession plan and champion in our next governor, and also to make the most of this final year of the Newsom administration and continue to build the strength and power of the nonprofit sector. So thank you all, and we will talk to you all soon. Much appreciated.